Beautiful wherever you are.
Ditto. Hello.
Live. Hey everyone.
We're live. Hi.
We can't wait
Tell
to
us
say
if you're
hello.
here.
Who's here? Say hi.
Send us a comment. And if you're watching this later because you saw our Instagram post that accidentally said it was at 2 p.m. Eastern time, sorry about that. I think there was some confusion because often we do meet at 2 p.m. Eastern time and on Fridays. So this is an unusual month. Hi, Breit. Hi, Gail.
Hello,
Breit and Gail,
hello. Thanks for being here. It's been a long time, it feels.
Thanks for coming. It does. I mean, we have, because we took July off, so it's been a minute. Should we start with our icebreakers?
Yeah, let's start with our questions. So tell us about the best part of your summer so far. What have you guys been up to? How about you, Mary? What's the best part of your summer?
So I'm going to share something that happened this morning because it's what's on my mind and it was cool, which I just told Nicole, which is that my son always wakes up really early because he's 3. So we often get up around 5:30. And hi, Krista. And this morning he got up like 5:30 and he wanted to go sit outside, which we sometimes do in the mornings. We just sit on our porch and it's like quiet. It's nice. But it was so early this morning when we went outside that it was just dawn. It was barely dawn. And we were sitting there. We usually look for birds, but this morning we saw all of these bats, like dozens and dozens of bats flying overhead. And it was really cool because I don't think he'd ever seen bats before. And he was super excited, he was trying to count them all as fast as he could. How about you, Nicole? What's a fun thing you've done this summer?
Yeah, I think taking a couple of weeks off, taking some downtime while we were away and just spending time at my wife's family cabin, which is right waterfront on the ocean. My son and I have a tradition of camping out on the deck. So we set up our tent and so we fall asleep listening to the waves. So lovely. Nice. And I just read a lot of books. It was great. Great to unplug.
Really nice. Yeah, that sounds great. Did you read anything you loved?
Oh, I read so many books. I actually still have a bag on my floor of books I haven't unpacked. I always pack way more than I can possibly read. So I was up to like a book every day and a half. I burned through a ton. And one of them was a book. Elizabeth J. Andrews is the author, and she's a writing instructor and has a book on revision, a couple of books on craft, and I really like her stuff. So I read a couple of her books.
Cool.
Yeah.
That sounds so nice.
Hi, Shelley Patchlock and Shelley Logan.
Hi, Shelleys, both Shelleys. Breit says a week with family at Disney. Also getting to see my freshmen start marching band. Oh, that is so nostalgic. That must be exciting. Speaking of high school, I saw a friend yesterday from high school who I haven't seen I think I've seen him once since we graduated from high school. And he was like a foot taller than he was in high school. And I didn't realize people had growth spurts after high school, but apparently you can.
Wow.
I didn't know people had growth spurts in their 20s. Gail says seeing lightning bugs and fireworks in the nation's capital. Lovely. That's so nice, Gail.
I've never seen lightning bugs.
What? Really?
Yeah, I don't know if we don't have them in the Pacific Northwest or where do I see them?
You can come visit me. We see them every night.
Oh, wow.
They're really fun.
I see a lot of blackberry bushes. We've talked about this.
Yeah, you have a lot of blackberry bushes. Okay, we had one more question. What was our
Go for it, Mary.
Question? I don't remember what it was.
What are you looking forward to this fall?
Oh, yeah.
We're just rounding out the summer. What's going on in the fall you're looking forward to?
What are you looking forward to? Since I was supposed to ask it, you can answer first. And we want to hear we want to hear your answers too. What are you looking forward to in the fall? Hi, Liz.
Yeah, I think I'm just looking forward to things getting back into routines. It's, summer's been great, but it's been like routines have been disrupted for such a long time over the last,
Yeah.
18 months or so. So I think it'll be just good for everyone once we get settled back in and kids are in programs. My daughter's doing piano. My
Yeah.
son is looking into we have a really cute little place that just opened up called Idea Space, and they do bubble tea. And then they have space for courses and things. So my son's going to do like a 3D modeling course with the 3D printer. So I'm like excited for them, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm excited for things starting for my kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really fun. Shelly says cooler temps. Ugh, me too. And a sailing course. And Britt says finishing the first draft of my novel. Yay. And shoulder surgery in 2 weeks. But good. You can be pain-free after and play violin again. Amazing. I'm looking forward to, I'm going to a wedding next weekend, and I don't get to go to too many weddings anymore because I'm kind of at an age where a lot of people are like kind of over that life milestone, past it. So this is a really good friend of mine, and I'm just really excited because I love weddings. I love dressing up and dancing.
So fun. It has been a long time since we've been to a wedding too.
Yeah.
So Gail, I'm totally with you. Less humidity, less frizzy hair. And Elizabeth's saying more consistent writing times with boys back in school and watching cross country season. Fun. Yay.
Less sweating.
So yeah, exactly. I'm just bursting with excitement today, and I just can't wait to start talking about Mary's book. And I know we've got lots to cover. So should we get started, Mary?
Let's do it.
Okay, so maybe I'll just talk about the shape of today. We are going to do the thing we do. We're going to introduce ourselves, talk about what we do here at Craft Talk Book Club. And I'm going to start with a quote about Mary's book. And I'd like to ask you a question too before we kick into the questions that you had, Mary. And then we have time as well for all of you to ask Mary some questions, anything at all about her book. And then we can't forget that we actually have a writing challenge for you today and some swag you can win. So, packed. So do you want to start, Mary, by reminding everyone what we do?
Yeah, so Craft Talk Book Club, I was just pulling up our, what we like to say at the top. So in Craft Talk Book Club, if you're new to us, we are a group of writers who meet monthly. We took last month off, but typically we meet every month and we talk about craft choices that an author has made in a recently published novel or memoir. So looking at both fiction and nonfiction, because I really focus often on fiction and Nicole focuses on nonfiction in our work. So we alternate month to month, and we just love to like read and talk about craft choices. It's like where writers can come and get sort of nerdy about what other authors are doing. And we started in January. So this is our 7th month because we skipped July. Brett, yes, if you need to leave early, we will email the writing challenge. Thanks for that question. And so I'll introduce Nicole, and then you can introduce me, Nicole. Nicole Breit is an award-winning essayist, poet, and writing instructor based on Canada's Sunshine Coast. Her work is widely published in print and online journals, and her essay, An Atmospheric Pressure, was selected as a notable by the editors of Best American Essays 2017. She's the creator of Spark Your Story, a series of online programs for life writers that help writers get experimental with structure and master the foundations of storycraft.
Great. Thanks so much, Mary. And Mary Adkins is the author of the novels When You Read This, an Indie Next Pick and Best Book of 2019 by Good Housekeeping, Privilege, New York Post Best Book of the Week, and Today.com Best Summer Read, and Palm Beach. Yay. The reason we're here today. Her books have been published in 13 countries, and her essays and reporting have appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Slate, and more. She teaches storytelling for the Moth worldwide and creative writing both online and in her hometown of Nashville. So as I
Thank
said,
you.
I'm really excited. Oh, you're welcome. I'm really excited to talk about this book, which I'm going to brag a little bit about. It's so beautifully constructed. It has great characters. It has great pacing. I found it was just twisty enough that I just couldn't put it down. And did you catch Mary's fun personality and sense of fun in it? The doctors' names. Wink Martindale. Wink Martindale. I used to watch that show Tic-Tac-Toe with my grandma, and when I saw him referenced, I was like, oh my gosh. And then Elvis. Elvis has a relationship with one of the characters. So I love this. And I just wanted to start with a quote that I picked and then ask Mary an opening question. So my quote is, later, Mickey would realize that Cecil Stone was the kind of old, rich white man who didn't gain defining features until one got to know him and could see past a generic first impression. And so I chose this because on the surface, we get an impression of a character who's a bit plain and average, and there's really not much remarkable about him. But there's also something in those words about how easy it is to just see the 1% as a very white male generic group without distinguishing features. And of course, that isn't true. There's a lot that Mary has opened us up to see the distinguishing features in the Stones, and bringing us into this world where we get to have the layers peeled back. And what are the stories of the Stones? What can we actually relate to them on? And I love how Mary just brings us right into that question. So the question that I wanted to start with for you, Mary, is, we've talked about central questions in stories before, and I wondered what was the initial question that sparked your idea for this book, and did it change in the writing? Did the central question for the story change once you got into the draft?
Yeah, you're so good, Nicole, at finding like those quotes or little moments that are like mini versions of what the book is doing as a whole. I feel like you always really nail that. I love when you do that. Yeah, that's such a fun question. So what Nicole is referencing is something that I actually teach in my writing program, which is that when you're starting a draft, you want to start with like a big question that's at the heart of it. So it's sort of like theme, but it's theme asked as a question because questions are open and we don't know the answers yet. And we can go in with curiosity and allow ourselves to be surprised as the writer. And so with this book, the question really that I was thinking about at the beginning was something like, what do two people do when they are in a committed relationship, particularly like a legal one, like they've gotten married, and they reach a point where their differences in values like comes to a head, and they start to like face this value conflict. Like, how do you love and live with someone whose values really are in friction with your own? And like, is it possible to continue to have the same closeness and intimacy and mutual respect? And like, what is lost, and what compromises do you have to make to maintain the relationship? And like, and how far is too far? Like, those were questions I was really interested in. And I think one reason that I really had the idea for this book coming out of like, it was in 2018, late 2018 when I first thought of the idea for this book. So it was, it was 2 years into Donald Trump's presidency. And so, and I know you're in Canada, but I know you're very well aware of everything that was going on in the United States and how it really felt very much like politics was something dividing families and like dividing and really testing relationships in a way
Mm.
that I hadn't personally remembered it ever being in my lifetime. And so that was what was on my mind. And I thought that could be a really interesting thing to explore in the context of this one marriage. And so okay, so what did I know right away? Well, I really wanted, like Mickey to accept this job working for someone who Rebecca thought was like an immoral human. And I wanted it to be like he didn't have to accept the job. It's not like he didn't have other options. He did have other options, which makes it more offensive to Rebecca. Um, and then and then I was interested in, I guess the question did sort of evolve, because then what kind of, I started to discover as I was writing is that I was interested in how someone can have really um, strongly held values and then start to sort of um, maybe not even consciously question them, but sort of shed them or set them aside when they
Mm.
become either inconvenient or just too much trouble, or even like threatening, like if there's a big, there's a something they really care about that's threatened by those values. When does a person, like in the story Rebecca, like decide to let them go because there's something she cares
Mhm.
about more?
Mhm.
So yeah, sorry, long answer there.
Great answer. Well, and also in bringing us in close to the stones, we can see that Cecil might be an immoral character, but he is decent enough to care about without being required to be generous to his employees. He does a few things that are quite kind, and
Mhm.
nobody is 100%, you know,
Yeah,
terrible.
and that's what I love about, as you were reading that quote and talking about, how we, could look at the 0.001% as a generic group, or we could zoom in and see humanity. I think that's one thing I really love about creative writing. I mean, both fiction and nonfiction, is I feel like so much of it is zooming in to get more humanity, to get closer to the humanity of whatever it is we're talking about, that is
Mhm.
obscured, is obscured outside of creative writing.
I feel like it's a safe place to do that too, because it may not always feel safe to have these conversations on social media or with family members where there might be different convictions and different values. But in a
Yeah.
creative space, we can explore all the questions, um, yeah, in a way that gives us time to work out
Yeah.
what we think about things.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it about writing, and I really love it about fiction. Like fiction feels to me a safe, kind of a safe place to explore really big existential scary questions that may be a little bit too intense um, to
Mhm.
explore more openly without that buffer for some people.
Mhm.
Gail says compartmentalization is how I define it when I see people who go against a normally defined value to get what they need. Yeah, compartmentalization, and we're all
Mhm.
good. We're all good at it. We all do it when we need to. Um, I think it's a really human thing to do.
Especially when we need to protect someone we love.
Yeah. And I
Mhm.
don't mean, I'm not saying it's a human thing to do as in it's justifiable. I'm more thinking of it like as a character trait. If we're writing characters, that's what I mean. It's a
Mhm.
human thing to do in
Mhm.
that way. It's a very,
Mhm.
I think it's a really, yeah, human way to write a character, to have them
Mhm.
compartmentalized like that.
Mhm.
Well, I sent out a couple of questions, and I would love, I don't know if anyone got a chance to think through them, but they're just some things that I thought would be fun to share. So let me actually pull up my question because I lost it. But the first one was, how might the story be different if it were told more from Mickey's perspective? Because in an earlier draft, it was. So did anyone have any thoughts on that? How might the story have been different if we really heard if mainly it was Mickey, because you know, the draft, for those of you who have read the book, the draft now, or it's not a draft anymore, it's the book now is primarily Rebecca's story. We get some of Mickey's point of view, but mostly it's, I would say it's Rebecca's story. It's probably like 60-40 or 70-30 airing toward Rebecca. And while we're waiting for people to share, Calista says, maybe that's important in writing, to allow the characters to be actually human. Yeah, not to be perfect, for sure. Gail says, oh, Calista says, is he sort of the hero of the story? Okay, yeah. Britt says, you might not be able to fully capture the feeling a mother has toward her children or lost babies. Yeah, it was, because it was really about, I mean, the book now is very much about Rebecca's feelings around this whole thing that happens with their child. And to be, now that I'm remembering, like when it was primarily Mickey's story in an earlier draft, it wasn't like, oh, it was just Mickey's point of view about what was going on with the baby. What was going on with the baby just played a smaller role. It wasn't like, oh, let's now get the male perspective. So that's interesting that was my instinct, was to not make that as big of a deal when it was his story. Gail says, I don't think he would have been as cynical about who he was working for, less judgmental, just go and do his job and not care about their values and morals. Yes, exactly. He was still the same. When it was primarily from his perspective, he was still the same person. Like, he wasn't cynical about who he was working for. And you know, there is, I feel like we can give spoilers because I'm assuming people have read it at this point. There is a, you know, there's a part of Mickey's story in the book where he like wishes he were back in New York and singing, and he misses what he loves to do, which is performing. And the story was a lot more about that, about his professional dissatisfaction having to do this job, that when he chose it and was grateful for it, that he really missed his vocation and wished he could go back to doing that job. So really quickly, the reason that I did that shift is because I turned in an early draft to my editor, Emily, and we had a phone call, which is typically how Emily and I have worked together. I'll send her a first draft, she'll read it, and then we have a phone call before she tells me, before she sends me anything written, any notes or edits in the manuscript, or any email notes, which she also sometimes sends. But before all of that, we have a phone call, and the phone call, I think, is meant to soften any major feedback, you know, that a writer it may be a lot for writers to take. And so in this phone call, the major feedback was, this feels more like Rebecca's story. Can we write it from her perspective more? Which is at first I thought, like, it actually was really funny. I really like my editor, Emily. She's wonderful. And she was kind of, it was almost like she was so nervous at how I was going to take that news that she did a lot of like preparing me to hear what she was about to say. To the point that I was sitting there thinking, is she going to tell me that she's not going to publish this book? Like, I was like, I was thinking, what is coming? So that when all she said was, we need to make a pretty major shift in point of view, or at least a shift in the balance of point of view. It was still from Mickey's and Rebecca's perspective, but needed to be more Rebecca and less Mickey. I had this dual reaction of being like relieved, because it was like, oh, okay, well, that I can do. The book is still coming out. It wasn't anything great. But also then the next reaction was like, wow, that's going to be a lot of work, you know? So of course there was a little bit of a little bit of that, just normal kind of like, oh, are you kidding me? I have to do this now. But then once I thought about it, it was like, okay, I get it. And actually, once I got really dove into it, I was excited because I saw how what her suggestion was going to make the story better, because it was going to make it, like Britt said, like it became much more about kind of the parent-child bond than it had been, and much more about mothering. And yeah, so it shifted in that way. Calista says, when did Mrs. Stone become such a big part of the story? Not until I shifted the point of view to be more Rebecca. And in order to bring her more into the story, she got to know that, I think this was another conversation Emily, my editor, and I had, like, ways of bringing her more into the story. And we're just kind of chatting about like, what could it be? And out of that conversation grew like, well, maybe she works for Mrs. Stone, and we could like expand Mrs. Stone. And I heard that and thought like, oh, that's fun. I'm going to explore that. So yeah, so Mrs. Stone, I mean, for the people, a number of people here are writers that I work with in my program. Like, Mrs. Stone she plays a huge role in the book now, but like in the first draft, barely any scenes. She was barely in any scenes. So that, I think that's an example of how in revision, if you want to, I mean, you can create, you can give a character a lot more stage time. It can really change the story in that way.
When you asked the question that came out, Mary, I was thinking of how important that relationship between Rebecca and Mrs. Stone was. And I was trying to imagine that through not knowing when that became a part of the story. I was trying to imagine how that would have worked with Mickey just popping in and dropping off apple slices, and the story being filtered through his point of view wouldn't have worked because it wouldn't have given them that like stage time.
Yeah.
So that's what I was thinking might be the answer to the question, was that you couldn't have had that relationship blooming in the same way without, if it was filtered through Mickey's point of view, would have been too limiting.
Yeah, exactly. Gail says, I was hoping you weren't going to turn her bad. It made me nervous every time Rebecca went to her. Yeah, that's good. Because I'm glad you had that feeling. That makes me happy, because I did want to create the feeling of like kind of having to be on your toes, like, is that the expression? Whatever the expression is, where you're kind of like a little bit on edge, because I kind of felt like that's how Rebecca would feel around her all the time. Like, I'm really not quite sure if she's trustworthy or what her deal is, even as they were getting closer. So another question I had that I threw at you guys was, how might the story be different if it had started earlier while they were living in New York? Because again, in an earlier draft, it did. What would you have thought? Like, I don't know. I know it's asking it's asking you to imagine that draft, but like, how would that have been a different reading experience if you read them Mickey and Rebecca meeting in New York and getting married and having a baby, and that were all part of the story? Would have been longer. Calista says, Gail, that reminds me, I wondered about Rebecca and her feelings toward her parents as well as her mother-in-law. Oh, she likes her mother-in-law, right? Oh, Liz worried that she would betray Mrs. Stone in her memoir. Yeah, good. I wanted you to fear that too. I'm glad you found Rebecca multi-layered. And not, kind of one note, because I know that how did my agent put it? At one point after the book came out, I was chatting with Claire, my literary agent, and I said, Claire, everybody hates Rebecca. Because my friends were texting me like, Rebecca is so annoying. And Claire, who has such a good way with words, said, I said, they say she's annoying. And Claire said, I don't think she's annoying. I think she carries more of the burden than most of us do. It's like, I like that phrasing. Britt says, if you started in New York, I don't think the tension would have built as quickly. I like the current pacing. Yay, I'm glad to hear that, Britt. that's basically exactly what my editor said. That
Mhm.
like, just like the New York stuff is, I think she said she liked it. It was interesting to read about Mickey and Rebecca meeting and getting married and having a baby, but she's like, there's no, like the story seems to really just take off once they get to Florida and all this stuff starts happening. So Emily, my editor, is the one who said like, let's try starting in Florida. Gail says, I think if it
Mhm.
had started back in New York, there would have been less backstory. Yes, less backstory, but it would have been in the story. So it would have been like the stuff that's backstory now was the beginning of the book. So it's nice. And again, I know a bunch of us here are working on books. I think it can maybe be helpful to be reminded that when you are given either given a big note like that, or you decide for yourself, wow, I need to take out the first 40% of my book, I need to chop the first 30% of my draft, there can be a little bit of a right, like the kill your darlings thing. But
Mhm.
usually that doesn't mean you're losing all of that writing, because you're going to pluck parts of it and drop it in as backstory or whatever it may be later in the draft. So a bunch of that still made it in. I actually remember like I chopped off the first third of the book or whatever that took place in New York, put it in a document, and then I went through and all the parts that were like, I love this part, I highlighted, because I was like, I'm going to find a place for that. I'm going to find a place for that
Mhm.
somewhere as a
Mhm.
flashback or something else. Liz says we would have gotten a better feel for the depth of Mickey's love for acting. Yeah, if we had followed more of his career in New York. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's I think New York, yeah, gave Mickey a larger stage. And also, I'm curious what people felt about Mickey and Rebecca's relationship, if you would be willing to share with me in the chat, because I've heard mixed things and I'm really curious to hear. One thing that well, actually I want to hear, what did you think of Mickey and Rebecca's relationship, Nicole?
I actually loved it. I kind of fell for them falling for each other, and I loved their banter. And yeah, I really enjoyed, even when they were fighting, I liked their relationship.
Cool.
Mhm.
Um, Britt says, I like how you had him to return to acting in California at the end. Yay, thanks. Me too. It made me happy that he got to go back to acting. So I think one comment that I got from someone was that, like, or I think I read it in a review, of course I read my reviews, that like the person didn't really see much of why Mickey and Rebecca were together, didn't feel the love between them. And as I
Hmm.
read that, I thought, oh, that's really interesting, because I do see it. And then I thought, well, that I also, I wonder if that whole first New York part had been in there, it would have been easier to track their relationship, because you'd have spent much more time with them together before they had a child. And
Mm.
we do have those flashbacks, but really the whole book takes place now after they've just had a baby, so they're parents of a young baby, which is like not the most romantic time in a relationship. So I wondered if that's what that
Mm.
person was responding to.
Mm.
um Gail says they fought constructively. I liked that. Felt like they were a real couple. Awesome. Calista says, I
Mhm.
think their relationship worked. I think he was more sensitive to her than she was to him. Right. Right. Like his mother, yes, his mother makes his comments about his unhappiness, and Rebecca's like kind of in her own world and is like, what? He's unhappy? Um, okay. And then I asked one more question. Let me throw it out. What key moments do you notice in the evolution of Rebecca's attitude toward the stones? Were there any particular, because we know like she definitely evolves, right, in her attitude toward the stones. But I just think as writers, since we're here to talk craft, were there any particular scenes that you felt like captured that evolution? Let us
I think
know.
early on there was that moment where Mrs. Stone says that she trusts Rebecca and how that sort of lands with Rebecca. And a big one too is like realizing that Mrs. Stone lost a child. That's like a heart opening moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to see. I was about to start talking to you.
I'm sure there are more. I'm sure there are more. I hope I didn't steal anyone's thunder there.
No, I'm glad you said those. I was gonna see. Let's see what people say in the chat. Calista, maybe when she realized that the Stones wanted her at the dinner party, even knowing how she felt. Yeah, they wanted her at the second dinner party, right? Her willingness to open up about her own daughter and accepting Rebecca's role as a mother. Learning more about Mrs. Stone's life and then being dependent on them for Vash's healthcare costs. Right. Standing up to the elite instead of just rolling with whatever is asked of them when Rebecca rejects Mrs. Stone's check and takes full control of the memoir. Yeah, it's kind of, so what I think is interesting about the moments that you all are writing is some of them are like things that Mrs. Stone does. So in a sense, I think it's like Mrs. Stone becoming more humanized to the reader, and we are projecting ourselves onto Rebecca. So we assume that Rebecca is also seeing her as more human. And then other moments are seeing Rebecca's reaction to Mrs. Stone. And you can play with both. So sometimes, it's like, this is getting a little complex. This is getting a little advanced here, but like, if you know the reader's identifying with a particular character in fiction or nonfiction, but I'm thinking about fiction for now. If they're identifying with a particular character, you cause an effect on the reader, and it's natural for them to assume that the character they're identifying with is also experiencing this new perspective. Gail says, I think Rebecca is less judgmental when she learns who Mrs. Stone was and made her money on her own. Yeah. Yeah, and there's this moment too, I don't even remember exactly where it is, but like where Mickey's telling her something about how Mrs. Stone acts, how they all hate her, and Rebecca's a little defensive of her. She's like, really? That doesn't sound like her. And I think that's a moment too where it's like, oh, whose side is she on here? Whose team has Rebecca landed on here? Do others have, do you all have questions for me? We'd love to open it up. We have some time now. Any craft questions or publishing questions? You can ask anything. Happy to answer.
Maybe while we're waiting for people to type in, I'm wondering what kind of research you did to kind of get inside the minds and hearts of the Stones, or was it all a work of imagination? Was there a little bit of research to try and figure out what their lives might be like on the inside, or?
Yeah, most of the research around the Stones was external, like what these people would have lived like, and then it was imagination. However, there was a little bit of research with Mrs. Stone specifically, because since I wanted her to be this self-made, extremely wealthy woman in her 70s, that meant she had to have like accrued wealth decades earlier in a time that would have been particularly hard for a woman to do that. And so I basically tried to find real life Mrs. Stones, like I just on the internet, and read about them. Like, who are they? And not just wealthy women in their 70s, but like wealthy self-made women in their 70s, business women who had accrued great wealth, and they're not that many of them, so it was like I was really reading about like 10 people, 15 people. And that was really fun because that allowed me, because there's some great interviews with some of these women, and that allowed me to get into her head a bit. Okay, we got some questions in here. Yay. How did you come up with the solution of Mrs. Stone leaving a note that fired everyone? I don't remember. I mean, I think it just kind of came to me. It felt like I liked how it was kind of anticlimactic in a sad way that also felt very true to like the way that they might treat their staff, rather than do it in person. But you know, I mean, I think you all know too, we're all writers, like a lot of times things kind of just come out and there's not really a reason for them as you're doing them. It's just later you look back and you think, I like that works.
Had you already had Mrs. Stone, one of her traits or habits was to just randomly hire people from time to time? Was that already a part of the story when you had that become a part of the ending?
Yeah.
So it made sense.
Exactly.
It was part of her character.
It was part of her character, right? Random hirings and firings as being part of her character. Yeah. Britt says, I like how you mentioned your influences. That was one of mine. Do you have a hero book that you modeled this book on? Yes, I had a couple in mind. One was The Vacationers by Emma Straub. And that was, I don't know if anyone's read that, but that's just like a family saga. It takes place over one vacation, and all of the family's issues come out on this one vacation. And so it's a very different book, but I liked the tone of it. I liked that it was character driven. I love her writing is so readable. So that was the one that I really started with as my hero book for this. The hero book is a term we use in our writing program, as my hero book for this one. And I wonder, did it change any other books along the way? We kind of stayed The Vacationers. Okay, and then let's see. How much of her own life creeps into your books, or my own life? How much of your own life, you mean? Little sayings, nuances of your life. A massive amount of my own life creeps into my books. You know, I think especially this one, because a lot of the factual things that happen are things that happened to me. I mean, meaning my husband was an actor and caterer in New York. The catering stories are, you know, based on stories I heard from him and my other catering friends who were also actors. We moved to Florida for a little while. We lived in Palm Beach. We had a baby. Like, all of that is true. But that's it. Like, the similarities end there. We haven't had a financial issue. There were no stones. There is no sick baby. Like, all of that stuff. That's where the fiction really takes off. And then of course the relationship is not us. Rebecca is actually, the irony is, like, Rebecca's probably the most unlike me of any character I've ever written, even though like a few basic facts of their lives are very reflective of ours. So yeah, so I love pulling from, you know, I think in a way it's a kind of like write what you know thing, where it's just not that you should write what you know, but sometimes it's just fun and easy to write what you know. Like, you know, not to say to take, there's nothing wrong with this, but there's also, I think, no particular value in like taking an experience you've had and then presenting it as fiction, or changing a few things and calling it fiction. But I think it's okay to do. And I also think it's more in my life, in my creative life, it's more like, I'm going to draw from a place where I've been, or I'm going to draw from, like I said, I'd been hearing my friends tell catering stories for years. So it was really fun for me to think of creating a catering story, because I just had like a lot of access to fun details about catering. You know, it's kind of like, well, what do you have access to that you find interesting? And of course, that's going to be a part of your life, whatever it is, because you have access to it. Let's see. Okay. Other questions. I love the take on how limited the choices really are for the rich. Oh yeah, Brett, thanks for saying that. You know, that was a really interesting conversation that I had in researching for the book by talking to friends who cater, because these are my friends. We were living in New York. A lot of my friends were actors and caterers, like my husband was. And they cater for the billionaire class. Like they're catering for Mike Bloomberg and George Soros and like billionaires. And one kind of recurring theme that I would hear from my friends who like spend a lot of time in these uber wealthy households is that they don't want that life. Not that they do want that life, that they don't want that life because it's so restricted and scheduled. And so, yeah, so that I tried to bring that in a conversation they have in the book, because I just thought that was a really interesting and a little bit surprising as an experience for someone who you might look at and say, like, wouldn't you see this wealth and be like, I'm so jealous, I would love to have all of this? And for people's reaction to be like, nope, I don't want this life. This is not good. I want to go home to my house, you know? Yeah, I did write the mom baby stuff from the start. It was sort of subsumed by the Mickey stuff. But yeah, the baby stuff there was definitely some of that in there. Yes, Gail, the murder mystery is not the finding a body. It's not something that's happened in your real life. Although a body was found on my street last week, so felt like I was in a murder mystery for a minute. It was crazy. Great, good question. Did I miss any questions here? Let's see. I think we got all the questions. Okay. Oh, Shelly says, I was wondering how you obtained so much. Oh, you were wondering how I obtained so much insider information about the uber rich. Yes, that is how I interviewed people who spend a lot of time working for them. I also, by the way, a couple of the stories in there are completely true. Like the portrait of the oil painting where she's painted over every time he gets a new wife. That's true. And it's funny because I didn't even remember which friend told me that story. And I was doing a book event where I said this exact thing last week. I said, like, that story is true. One of my friends told it to me, but I can't remember who told it to me. And after the event, my friend came over and she's like, I told you that story. That was me. But yeah, that was a true one. So yeah, sometimes details are so good that it's like, I'm not going to change a thing about that story. That exact story is going in the book. Yeah, it's kind of funny. There's, I'm sure we're all writers, so we probably all have this. But sometimes you hear a little thing and you think, oh, that's great. I want to put that in something. And yesterday in our writing program, we were meeting, and Julie, I don't know if Julie's here, but Julie shared that she once dated someone who every time they would go through a yellow light and make it, as in survive, he would say, buy me a Coke. And I was laughing so hard. And Julie said, Mary, you can't use that in anything. That's mine, which I thought was really funny. So yeah, sometimes those little gems are just so good that you want to throw them in something.
You can use mine, Mary. My friend used to kiss her hand and smack the dashboard when she'd go through a yellow light.
I've seen people do that one.
That's yours if you
that one. Okay, thank you. That's generous. Any last questions, Nicole? Should we transition?
Yeah, I did have a last. Well, I have a last question for you. Just that process of cutting where you cut the beginning of this book and dropped us into that action at the airport. Does that happen often when you're working with a novel, that you find that a first section ends up being cut in the end and you just had to write your way in to start?
I didn't with When You Read This. That novel I never cut a beginning. It was like,
Interesting.
There was like just that novel just like started and then that was it. With Privilege, yes, because I rewrote like the opening chapter so many times that my eyes were blurry, and to this day, I don't know what the first chapter is because I don't remember which one we landed on because I rewrote it so many times. Because exactly what you're saying, I was writing my way in. So it was a lot of backstory about Annie, and my editor kept saying, we don't need all this about Annie. We don't need all this about Annie. Let's just open with a scene with Annie. But I really wanted to get that backstory in. So that was one of those really tedious kind of writing experiences, was writing that opening. But yeah, neither of those was anything like this, where it was truly cutting like the first 30-40% of the book. I think it actually was not terribly painful because I kind of had a feeling I was going to have to. When you kind of know, like this is probably not going to wind up in the book in the end. And I had that feeling the whole time I was writing the New York part. And then I submitted it to my writing group and they all had the same note, which was cut the New York part. And I did it and sent it to my editor anyway. So by the time she said cut the New York part, she was like the fourth person who had told me that I should.
Okay. You'd heard it a few times.
Yeah. Well, do you guys want to hear our writing challenge? Should we share our writing challenge?
To show them, Mary?
I don't, because I'm at my co-working space.
Yeah, that's right.
If you got the email, you have pictures of the swag. We have to give away a Palm Beach beach towel, which Harrison, my assistant, was so excited about. It's really great. Palm Beach beach towel. We have a Palm Beach tote, a little tote, canvas tote with leather handles that has the book on it, and a signed copy of the book. So we'll pick 3 winners, and all you have to do, we hope this will be fun, is write an alternate first sentence of Palm Beach from a perspective other than Rebecca's. Write the first sentence of Palm Beach, a different first sentence of Palm Beach, from any character's perspective who is not Rebecca, other than Rebecca. And you're going to email it to me. You should have just hit reply to one of the emails you've gotten. But give it the subject, like writing challenge submission, so that I know what it is. Okay, so make sure you say writing challenge in the subject, and then just put your sentence in the email, and we'll collect them, and we'll announce a winner. When's our deadline, Nicole?
Should we do a week? So it's not too far off, but there's enough time to.
Yeah, next week. Do next Thursday. Save a week. Just do it in the next couple of days, or you'll forget about it. But I'll send a reminder. And then we'll announce winners and send you some swag.
I want to hear, right now, what's like brewing for people. Like, which point of view do you immediately, if you want to share, feel like you would want to try to write from? And to be clear, it doesn't have to start in the airport. It could start at any point, depending on which point of view, right?
Good question. Yeah, it definitely does. It doesn't need to be in the same scene. It could be anywhere. It could be in New York. Gail says 1 sentence. Yes, 1 sentence. Just an alternate first sentence from a different character's POV, point of view. I'm very excited to read these.
I am too.
When we came up with this idea yesterday. So yeah, I'll send out a reminder. They'll be due next Thursday. We have 1 week. And while we're waiting for people to share, I'll just go ahead and say next month, we are going to be discussing Nicole's book. This has been an exciting couple of months for the Craft Talk Book Club hosts. Nicole, do you want to? I actually have a copy of Nicole's book, but Nicole doesn't even have a copy of her book yet.
Britt said she had a copy of it. Britt had to leave, but she said in the chat that she has a copy of it. Yeah, which is great. And part of the reason some people have copies and I don't is because it's sold out in the first week and the contributor copy hasn't come yet. So hopefully, now that it's already in its second printing, if you order the book soon, it should arrive within the next 3 to 4 weeks, I hope.
Such an
and so the book is
problem.
a craft book. Oh, sorry, Mary, what did you say?
No, that's just such an awesome problem that it's already sold out. It's great.
Yeah, it is a really nice problem to have. And so a little bit about the book. It's called Getting to the Truth, The Craft and Practice of Creative Nonfiction. And so it's really a reference guide to anyone who's interested in starting to write short form memoir. My essay is on crafting the visual essay, and I've included sample excerpts or essays from writers that I've taught in my program. And so you can see an excerpt from a photo essay, a concrete essay, which is like the concrete poem. So it's a shape essay, a comic, a little graphic essay, and what we call a quilt essay. So it's formatted like a quilting, a quilt with squares, and you can see the pattern in the quilt reflects the story that's there in the text. So they're really exciting and they're fun and they're playful. And my essay is really to invite and encourage writers who may not have worked this way before, but want to just try their hand at being more creative and take a more collage approach to writing, even if they don't have a background in visual arts. Or there's no need to be intimidated. It's meant to be fun. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it next time.
Yay, me too. So I'm going to put a link in the chat. If I can find the chat. Oh, I think I can't do the link in the chat. You have to do the link in the chat, Nicole.
Oh,
I was going to put a link to order the book in the chat. But I'll put it in an email too. I can
I'll see if I can
email to order the book, because I'm sure they'll be printing.
That sounds great. Yeah, it'll be through Hippocampus Books. Hippocampus Magazine has a press, and that's who the book was published through. So,
yay! And do we have a date for the next book club, or we'll put that in an email too?
Let's put that in an email too.
Okay. We'll put that in an email too. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. It was fun to talk about the book with you, and I look forward to reading your sentences. Get them in, just because it's fun and we'll love reading them.
Hey, me. Absolutely. Thanks for being here. It was good to see everyone.
So good. Bye, everybody. Have a good weekend.